Welcome to Business Over Borders. I'm your host, Leo Tucker, and today we've got a mini-series about consumer behavior. I'd like to introduce my guest, Matthew Steinbrecher. Matt, good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me on.
So I want to talk today about consumer behaviors. Now, when customers buy things in different countries, whether that's the US, Canada, EU, Australia, they're accustomed to paying with certain payment methods. They're used to, certain spending habits. So I want to dial down in and talk about the U.S. a bit today. Let's talk broadly about consumer buying behaviors for U.S. consumers.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think a lot of people are starting to forget because it's so common to us now is that Amazon really changed the world in consumer experience. And obviously being a U.S.-based company, it just kind of changed the game. You start with the simplest thing as Prime. Like delivery with Prime, it's so fast.
Yeah, delivery same day, next day, can't go.
Yeah, I mean, same day, like that night, I got a 2-hour delivery window. It's pretty incredible. And obviously there's huge cities around the world now too, everywhere from London to Hong Kong that now have that capability too. But it all kind of started with Amazon largely. And, at this point now it's almost a decade ago. And as they built out more and more infrastructure to ramp up their e-commerce presence, we saw that Amazon in general just kind of like set the standard for consumer behavior. And Bezos is obviously like very, very focused on consumer experience, making it easier for shoppers. That's why they dominate in the way they do. That's how they've become such a behemoth.
Absolutely.
And now obviously they're playing at a different level than they were a decade ago. But when they were kind of on the up and up and still a very big contender, I think one of the things that made them so unique was focusing on the shopper and trying to be in front of trends of consumer experience in the US in particular. And then, of course, now they just dominate globally too. But when you're looking at the US consumer scale, there's a lot of weird behaviors that we have that are very nuanced from many different cultures around the world. So I always look at Amazon as the benchmark when we talk about online retail, but taking a step back, you have to understand how American society has been over the last few decades really, since the inception of credit cards, which were founded and absolutely scaled in America. The consumer experience has very much so been driven around lines of credit, being able to buy something without necessarily giving up that money straight away.
Right.
And I think that's something that a lot of people just very fundamentally forget when they look at how Americans purchase and what they're used to from purchasing habits. So in the US, it's common that every single American has about 4.5 credit cards in their wallet, which is, obviously you can't have half a credit card, but that's a pretty staggering amount and significantly higher than any other country.
2.5 children and 4.5 credit cards.
Exactly. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's something that a lot of people really forget. I myself probably have 6 credit cards, but I have them all for different things, and I travel a lot, and they all have their different perks and rewards and benefits. And so you look at this credit-driven society that started way back when credit cards really kind of became a thing, and then the banks adopted them. The issuing banks started to build out rewards. So it started with stuff like American Express and Diners. The Diners card was originally like an exclusive club in New York that was only for very like high profile individuals. And they were able to get access to different clubs or different restaurants and things like that. And then it started to roll out to the masses and not be such a illustrious exclusive thing. So you have all these different segments of how credit cards started to build in segmentation within their audience to create more of a consumer first experience when it comes to banking. Instead of your traditional banking rails where you have a checking account, you load it up, you pay with that checking account. The banks really tried to innovate and focus on this credit-driven society wants to have the freedom to purchase what they want, assuming it's somewhere within the means of their purchasing power, but also the illusion that by purchasing with that line of credit, they're getting something in return. And it's built this like crazy society of consumer experience that I think has been like a struggle for a lot of people to figure out how to appease all these different shoppers as we evolve in, trending consumer experience behaviors.
So how does that play into, obviously if I go online to buy something, I expect to pay with a credit card, maybe a Visa bank card or something like that. But what other things in the U.S. do we see that's different from, let's say, Europe or Australia or, Asia?
I think most people are so oriented towards utilizing their credit cards that they will always lean towards the credit card being the first purchasing option that they use.
Yeah.
So obviously, if you're an online retailer or some sort of SaaS company and you don't offer Visa or MasterCard on your website, you're going to have a real hard time scaling.
Yeah, forget about it.
And it's impossible to really do well without having those as kind of your staple options. And I would say most people in the States are pretty well aware of their lines of credit. They do use them as much as they can, but it differs a lot from many other regions around the world because it's just not as heavily used. It's not such a foundational requirement to an individual's like financial portfolio, if you will, in many other regions of the world as it is in the US. It's very staggering how much credit is utilized in the States in good ways and definitely in bad ways, but it's very different from other regions around the world that'll have different shopping experiences.
Let's talk for a second about 3D Secure. Occasionally when I buy something, generally on my credit card, which is my primary payment method, occasionally I'll get a message that says, hey, you need to, we're going to send you a 2FA code and type it in here and then you can purchase it. But pretty rarely. That seems to be more commonplace around the world. Can you talk to 3DS in the States?
Yeah, I get this misconception a lot from businesses that are in EMEA specifically. They think that by offering 3DS in the US, it's going to make fraud go away and, they're going to have a better shopping experience. 3DS is not really a thing in the United States. The issuing banks have not adopted it at all. So ultimately, the issuers are the ones that control the 3DS experience, which is the two-factor authentication to say, like, is this actually Matt shopping? Or Leo, can you send me this 4-digit code that I sent to your phone to confirm that you're trying to make this purchase? That flow just doesn't really exist for us in the States. Very rarely will you get it. If you buy something from overseas, it's possible you get that flow, but it's pretty rare for you to get that on a, day-to-day basis of transactions. And I think what a lot of overseas retailers struggle with is understanding why we don't use 3DS. At the end of the day, it really comes back to the US, despite some of its issues with its banking system, it's still a very, very sophisticated banking system. So the real-time analytics and communication structures from bank A to bank B, when you're just talking about a US domestic transaction, are very, very strong compared to many other regions in the world. It's also that we always expect, we're very shopper first and shopper friendly in the US, but we're also a very capitalistic society where we allow the banks to, run a little freer than they do in some other regions around the world.
Right.
And so as a result of what you get is you have these banks that give individuals a credit card, right? So I have like a Capital One Venture card, for example. It's a travel-based credit card. Capital One is the issuing bank, and it's a Visa. So Visa is the network that communicates to the banks. Capital One gives me incentives as a shopper to spend as much money as I can in certain like spending category segments so that I get points from them. So they want me to put as much money as I can on my line of credit because what they're hoping for is that I don't pay off that full line of credit every month and every once in a while, or perpetually they get, a 25, 26% return on my line of credit with them.
Yeah, minimum payments are king. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Everybody wants to rack up interest. And so, if you're a consumer and you're savvy with your personal finances, you pay it off in 30 days. You don't pay any of those additional fees. So you get that line of credit for 30 days. But Capital One is incentivized to get me to spend as much money as I can to a point where I might not be able to pay off that full amount after that 30-day period. So they make an interest. Then you have me as a consumer, and our society in general is pretty materialistic, I would say. So for consumerism, it's quite high in the US. So a lot of people are buying a lot of stuff. Then you have your banks influencing you through different reward programs and incentives to buy more stuff so that you ultimately will rack up more debt with them, which hopefully they can recoup some of their investment through interest rates. And then you kind of have how that all plays together with regulatory atmosphere. And so the banks care more about making sure that their customers are as happy as possible and able to spend as much money as possible with the least amount of friction in that process.
Right. And 3DS is introducing significant friction to that process. I have to get a code. I have to type the code in. Do I remember, the login or something to where I have to put in the code? We're kind of talking about buying patterns. Let's talk about peaks and valleys. Like, when is it hot? Like in the U.S., obviously we got Black Friday, you got Christmas time. Let's talk about sort of cyclical buying increases and decreases throughout the year in the States.
I would say overall, when we look at the US society in general, we are very materialistic. When you look at the idea of the holiday season, Christmas time, everyone has an increased spending pattern. And that is partially fueled by them wanting to give gifts as part of this holiday season to their loved ones or their friends or whatever. But of course, that then becomes exacerbated by the people selling them those gifts will offer extremely heavy discounts or some sort of incentive program to get them to spend more. And having that kind of sentimental value where typically you're around loved ones and, you're meeting family and things like that, kind of that idea in American society, at least, of gift giving, it's very fundamental to that sentimental feeling in the holiday season.
Absolutely. You go to dinner and you get a gift, bring a gift.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's a lot of my European friends think that it's a very shallow piece of our society, but it's a piece of our society nonetheless. And I think it's something that if you're selling to Americans, you got to know this. You got to know that that's kind of a vulnerable time for them to convert on your website or, upsell them to something additional if they're already a longtime subscriber. Like, hey, I know you really like my products, but it's holiday season. Maybe you want to get something for your partner or whatever. All sorts of things that you can use to manipulate that like sentimental holiday feeling that is already a heightened sense of urgency on purchasing things, an impulse on purchasing things because your banks are giving you incentives. You're getting holiday bonuses at work. Everything is kind of driven around that cyclical time, which starts just before, well, I guess for most retailers, it starts just before Thanksgiving, which ultimately leads into Black Friday. And now Cyber Monday, because why not make a whole weekend out of it?
Yeah, it's a whole long weekend.
Yeah. And then that basically bleeds into steep discounts all the way up until, Christmas or New Year's.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thought. With e-commerce being as strong and so many retailers coming out of the U.S. Thanksgiving and Black Friday, probably more specifically, has really been thrust upon the world stage. Like, I imagine many countries around the world, especially anyone selling into the U.S., knows about Black Friday. It's not just a U.S. holiday at this point. It's global as far as retail space goes.
Yeah, but it certainly originated here.
Yeah.
And it's definitely, it's just a made-up BS holiday. I like to call them Hallmark holidays, like Valentine's Day. And America's really good at building these, again, coming back to like kind of that materialistic society, like that need to have something extra to go above and beyond for that particular day or that particular time of year.
Yeah, there's no better way to loosen the purse strings than to tug on the heartstrings. So
Exactly.
That makes sense. So just to wrap it up, let's give some advice to retailers who are selling into the U.S. What are some quick points that they can address to have, optimize their sales and their conversions to customers in the U.S.?
Yeah, the first thing is making sure you truly understand the price points of what you're selling and really understand your demographics. Even in the U.S., for anyone that's been here and been to different states, the South is different from the Midwest, which is different from the East Coast, which is different from the West Coast. You do have to understand where your product's selling really well, what type of consumers are buying from you. Is it, women aged 16 to 30, or is it men aged 75 to 90? You don't really know what you're getting. And I think if you don't focus on what your demographics are and how to best capture them in what type of purchasing cycles that they want to have or that they need, you're not going to drive conversion. So the biggest thing is you always want to make sure you're giving good experiences with the checkout flow. Firstly, you need to make sure that it's a seamless checkout. There's not a lot of friction introduced in the checkout, and it's much easier to purchase something quickly. Most of the time we are impulse behavior driven, and if you're able to get someone to check out quickly, you will be able to convert really well on that particular individual. The second thing is obviously free shipping. If you are able to give someone free shipping in the US and you can get it to them in 2 days, your chances of success selling that product are exponentially higher than if you're going to take 7 to 8 days and you're going to charge them $25. It will really hinder your ability to properly scale within the US if you're unable to hone that in and get those shipping timelines down. The third thing I would really say is don't introduce unnecessary friction. A good example that we talked about would be 3DS. 3DS is not really a friction point that we've introduced. You don't want to offer that on your website. And I think just having as much of a localized experience and utilizing the local credit card rails is going to be your 100% best way to sell into US and appease your US customers. One of the issues with banks in the US is if you are selling to a US bank and it's coming from a foreign bank, because we don't have things like 3DS, the customer's bank is definitely more willing to accept the transaction and accept potential fraud on it, but they will still be a lot more reluctant to accept a transaction that comes from cross-border and overseas. And so I think if you're able to, number one, have a frictionless checkout. Number two, have some sort of free shipping or very quick shipping option to the customer so they can have that kind of Amazon experience in your checkout. Number three, not introduce any sort of unnecessary friction like a 3DS. And then most importantly, having a local presence here, a local bank here in the US will help bring all three of those things together to ultimately drive a very high conversion rate on your site and a stronger lifetime value for each of the customers you're able to get on board.
Outstanding summary, Matt. Thank you for that. Thanks for joining us on Consumer Behavior here at Business Over Borders. If you like this content, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. And if you want to see what we got coming out next, hit that little bell. See you next time.
Brought to you by the Reach Network. Visit withreach.com/network for more.